Hello there guys, what is going on? Daniel Childs back here again. It's my preview for the game tomorrow lunchtime at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea versus Brentford. Although we did not win last week and keep our little winning streak going against Arsenal, it still feels mainly positive and optimistic, as it should be, given the performance we saw last weekend against a very good Arsenal side. And then also just the level of performances we have seen so far this season under Pochettino. I think there's a real sense and excitement to see certain players play again. And I think that's a really refreshing thing to think about heading into this game. So in the preview, as I usually do, we'll go through the team news, what Pochettino had to say earlier in his press conference, and maybe we'll touch on Nkunku because there was some big news about him earlier as well that was quite shocking to hear. And then we'll get in a little bit to Brentford, what they're going to offer, the big dangers Chelsea have to be aware of, and then I'll give you my predicted lineup. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Turn those notifications on. Hit the like button too. Really helps the show out. If you're listening on the podcast, please do give us a positive rating review. That is much appreciated as well. But let's get into it. So Pochettino press conference. I mean, in terms of injury news, it wasn't drastically different. There weren't any major news shocks in terms of that. We know that Connie Chukwuemeka is still out. He's had a setback. We know that Armando Broja is likely still going to be out because of his knock. Reece James will not be starting tomorrow, although he will be in the squad. I think that's probably smart management, and also because of Malo Gusto's form, I think that makes a lot of sense. So it's not that much of a shock, and they're clearly trying to be very careful with Reece James, which I think a lot of people can't really be that annoyed about given the fragility of that player. And in terms of players who will not be playing tomorrow, but I think the biggest news, in my opinion, from the press conference was that Pochettino admitted that Nkunku is very close, which, I mean, it's not like we're a million miles away from that estimated return date. I think it was usually, I think at the start, the worst was January, but then it kind of got pushed back to December. So I was sort of waiting for December, Christmas time, hopefully. But the fact that he could be back as soon as after the November international break, which isn't that far away if you think about it, is massive news for Chelsea. And he also spoke about the differences that Nkunku could have brought to Chelsea's attack. I think that's very obvious when you look at what Chelsea did during pre-season, the talent of Christopher Nkunku in front of goal. But that would be a huge boost. And if we can get to that place, even though we've got a difficult run of fixtures, still in a good place and still performing well, then that's going to be an even greater boost when he returns. So when he returns, I know it's the biggest cliche, but it will feel like a new signing because he is a new signing, and it will feel like, I think, a massive step up, hopefully, in level for the attack, which already, I think, has done a lot of good things. It's not like our attack is at a horrendous level. They are producing. It's just we know the next level that Christopher Nkunku, at his ability with his talent, could contribute. But let's look at Brentford. So Chelsea actually haven't won against Brentford in the Premier League since the first encounter against them in October 2021 after they got promoted. Since then, we've lost 2 against them at Stamford Bridge, that horrendous 4-1 defeat in April, I think, of 2022, and in last year in April, this year in April, last season. I'll get it right eventually. Last season with Frank Lampard. I've been trying to block it out of my mind. That was one of those really dreadful games that cycle of defeats we had at the back end of last season where it was pretty tragic. And from a home perspective and home form point of view, Chelsea haven't been really good. It's one home win, only one home Premier League win in the last 12. And obviously that couldn't have been solved and boosted by last weekend's draw against Arsenal late on. In terms of Brentford this season, I've seen I do follow some Brentford fans who have either, write about the club, just follow the club. Quite concerned so far this season in the sense that they've lost, obviously, Ivan Toney until January, and there's an expectation that we quite know, and from a Chelsea point of view, that Ivan Toney could be moving on in January anyway. They've obviously lost David Raya to Arsenal on loan, and there is a sense that maybe they are going to dip this season and could actually find themselves within a relegation battle. I personally can't see that happening. Now, you've got to factor in Leeds and especially Leicester last season. I mean, no one at this time of the season last year would have actually believed they would get relegated. And I know how you can very much be dragged into that without knowing it. But I still think actually this year, based on the evidence, and we saw it last weekend, they emphatically beat Burnley 3-0 at home. And we're seeing how much of a struggle it is for those promoted teams, Burnley, Sheffield United and Luton, to adapt to the Premier League. So I do think, another cliche here, sorry for having already two in this preview, but I do think there are three teams worse than them based on the evidence so far this season. And I do think the know-how of Thomas Frank, I do think the actual intimidating atmosphere that they've been able to build at their new stadium and how they play. I've complimented them before, and I do mean this as a compliment. They remind me of kind of 04-05 to 06 Blackburn and Bolton. Very effective teams at times from set pieces, can be very direct and very physical against you, but are effective and get the job done and can actually ruffle the feathers of some of the biggest teams. And I don't think that's to try and demean their quality of player, their coach. I think that actually is a compliment. And I do think over the course of the season, that will bear out. I think the long term will be, you can't keep relying on teams worse than you to stay in the Premier League. That will eventually, I think, catch up with you. But that doesn't mean just because there are concerns about them so far this season that they can't cause Chelsea problems. I think from a strategy point of view, firstly, it's about their set piece threat. It really is important. 16 of their 58 goals last season came from set pieces, and we know all about this with Brentford in terms of their different set piece routines, like these wild different variations from throw-ins, from corners, from free kicks, whatever it is. We know, and Chelsea should know from that absolute barrage we got at their stadium a couple of years ago when we actually won and somehow survived thanks to the heroics of Edouard Mendy, how difficult a challenge it can be if Brentford are on point with their set pieces. So I think from a defensive point of view, Pochettino may alter his personnel based on that, because that's where Brentford are going to look to create most havoc tomorrow. It's going to be trying to get those set pieces, trying to dominate Chelsea in the air. And I think that may mean that certain players who have actually been playing quite well recently may not start, but it's actually just understanding for this specific game, it's about trying to shore up that area and then hopefully allow the players further up the pitch to have a better impact. Because also psychologically for this game, it will be different to the Arsenal one. Chelsea are not the underdogs in this situation. And I think for all the optimism we've had in recent weeks, when you come up against a low block, or what would be deemed more of a low block or more of a team trying to frustrate you than Arsenal and even Burnley, who of course play progressive football. Fulham, I think, tried to press Chelsea. I don't suspect that Brentford, especially away from home, will do that as much. I think they will be a little bit more reserved. So that's where Chelsea are going to have to be a lot more intelligent with the way they build up, and then also make sure that if you are conceding set pieces, you're not conceding too many cheaply, but then also you do have the physicality to counteract what is there. Without Ivan Toney, that's obviously a big benefit for Chelsea. Of course, Brian Mbeumo, I think, has been a brilliant player for Brentford too. He's a regular scorer. Wissa too, who was brought in recently. He's been chipping in with the goals. It hasn't been as much, but still, they have a very aggressive and physical team that I think is well suited for the Premier League, that can give you problems. And I also think, that 12:30 kickoff can be a little bit sluggish, and that's, from an intensity point of view, that's a big thing too. The 5:30 kickoff, the rain, it was against Arsenal. It was very easy for Stamford Bridge as a crowd, as the players, to get up for that game, because we had to compete with Arsenal. For this, it's a 12:30 kickoff. As I say, it's not too far away from the morning, and you want the team to still be alive and still have that intensity of pressing and physicality and being sharp to every first ball, even if the level of opponent isn't the same. So I think that's important. So then going into my starting lineup, I am going to change a few things in terms of the defence, as I've already said, in terms of that aerial threat that Brentford have, and given that Axel Disasi, it appears, is back. Benoit Badiashile could be back in the squad, but I don't think he's going to go straight into the starting lineup. That's another physical player that you could bring in here that I think aerially is brilliant for Chelsea and was last season. Robert Sanchez is going to stay in goal. I put out a poll, I'll show you the results now, that was sort of asking you guys, what are your thoughts on whether Robert Sanchez should be dropped? And I know some of you feel he's not good enough for Chelsea. Some of you feel that's going overboard and we should trust him. I said in my added time episode when someone asked me about Sanchez is that I just can't see him being dropped instantly. And I don't think that would send the greatest message, maybe from a psychological and kind of unity point of view, to instantly drop a player. I think Petrovic will be given the chance in the Carabao Cup in midweek against Blackburn. And then maybe it's a more comfortable transition if Petrovic has a good game, hopefully in the League Cup, and then maybe you can bring him in. Of course, then it's a massive question, do you bring him in against Spurs? And actually, this is a better game to get him ready for life as a Chelsea goalkeeper at Stamford Bridge. But I'm we may be stunned, but I think Sanchez, given the comments of Pochettino, will stay in goal. That doesn't mean he doesn't have a mistake in him. We just hope that those things can be ironed out over the course of the season. But I understand why some people would be calling for a change. Absolutely. The back four, Malo Gusto has to stay in this team. I think he's been a brilliant addition to Chelsea. Axel Disasi, I think, comes back into central defence. Thiago Silva, I've said I've been proven wrong about my doubts over him under Pochettino. I think he's been a wonderful player too, so obviously he's going to keep his place. And Levi Colwill does go to left back. And I know this is harsh performance-wise on Motka Correa, but this is about physicality. This is about aerial and height in this game that I think is important. And with the 5-sub rule, you can always bring on players like Motka Correa if you need to later in the game. And I just think that that's what Pochettino will be going for. That, again, that's not to try and demean Motka Correa. I think he's had an amazing redemption arc in recent weeks. He really has. But I still do think that would be my concern. And with that back four, especially the three centre-backs, basically, you've got a really dominant and physically imposing set of players there who I think can really dominate and really hopefully boss Brentford when they do try and come forward. Enzo, Caicedo, Gallagher, it's the magic trio at the moment. I don't see why you change it. And I think more for this game, it's a challenge for Enzo Fernandez. I think I want to see Enzo directly impact this game. It's not to say that his progressive passing and his performances have been awful. I think some people are kind of asking the question, when you are playing a little bit more advanced, when you are kind of being that creative, progressive midfielder, you want to see that player contribute directly to a goal maybe. And hopefully he could do that. And also shooting from distance, because he seems to get himself in good positions. And when you're coming up against a team who are going to sit deep, I want to see Enzo be better from shooting outside the box, because he had a chance last week. It's about getting those on target, and hopefully he maybe can score from that distance and maybe improve that side of his game. Then we get into the front three. This was another question I asked on my poll, and it was interesting that the most popular was the front three that Mauricio Pochettino went with last week, and that was basically the false nine front three. But as I'll get into in a breakdown episode, it wasn't quite a front three, but it did, of course, include Palmer as that more central attacker, and you had Sterling and Mudryk out wide. Do you want a more natural number 9? You can't have Armando Broja, but do you want Nicholas Jackson? For all the faults of Jackson, you can be critical of his lack of clinical edge. He is a more commanding player than, say, Cole Palmer. But then I looked at that performance last week, and I just think the form of these three players, Sterling, Palmer and Mudryk, just supersedes that for me currently. I feel they are just such a threat, and I want all three on the pitch. I think Sterling, how hungry he looks at the moment, how much he's able to turn and be aggressive on the wing. And even, that first half against Burnley, who were forced to sit quite deep, you look at the way he ran at that fullback. I think it was Roberts on a consistent basis, really aggressive, and I think he can do similar here. He did similar against Luton earlier in the season. Mikhailo Mudryk obviously is going to be full of confidence, and you want to keep that confidence going, that he can try audacious things in a game like he did last week, whether he meant it or not. It's I still think Mudryk, you want to see Mudryk playing, and Palmer, he is the dictator. He is the one making things happen. He is at the heart of Chelsea's attack. So for me, all round, that's why I'm going for that front three over having Nicholas Jackson. Again, if we get to, 11:30 tomorrow and I see that team line up and Nicholas Jackson's there, I understand why from a conventional point of view. But at the same time, I'm looking at form, I'm looking at productivity. And that's why, and maybe having that kind of freeing player in Palmer who can drop a little bit deeper, maybe it drags that Brentford system out of shape and out of line a few times, and then out wide you've got the ability to go over and find those balls in behind that can really make the difference tomorrow. So that is my predicted lineup. Let me know yours in the comments below, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.